That's well said, and that's good insight. You both touched on something I wanted to ask as well, which is that, Jen, Paul, myself, we're all in the industry, and when I say the industry, I mean the larger pharma industry. And so, you guys have been doing this for years. Jen, you've been in clinical trials with your sons. Paul, you know what the experience is like as well. When it sounds like there are areas here where there could be support from institutions, from organizations, from the larger industry as we move to find cures, find solutions and stuff. But really, what we know as an industry is that level of support can vary from trial to trial, whether it's there, non-existent, or variable. And going through in your years, what has been your experience in dealing with the industry, with the larger pharma industry? Is there a level of support there? Are there things that you'd like to see? What's your overall grade? And, if there are things that are lacking, which I'm sure there are, the scenario sounds quite intense, but what would you like to see? Where is it at? And where would you like to be in 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, et cetera? What kind of support do you need?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think first of all, it's gotten better, right? So when I started this journey of clinical trials, there was no transparency. There was no communication, no support. Financially, they had made these kind of mistakes that should have just been really anticipated. For example, the pharma company would sponsor a study, and we would be expected to put all of the expenses on our credit card and maybe be reimbursed in the next 6 months. And so, through the voices of people like mine, we said, well, families are living paycheck to paycheck. So we actually need to, pay for as much as you can up front. Limit the expenses. So there's that sort of financial piece, anticipating the needs of the families. And I think more and more companies are thinking about childcare needs, are thinking about time off work needs, thinking about stipends. One thing they haven't gone towards, though, is really thinking about the caregivers that have to be participants in clinical trials. And I'll give a funny example of Austin, my oldest son, participating in a clinical trial for a mechanical arm. And it was sent to me, and I was meant to maintain this thing. And he had to keep a journal and make diary entries daily and try out this arm daily. But guess what? Everything he did required my participation. And at the end of this study, he was consented. I was never consented. Nobody ever trained me or talked to me about it. It just was accepted that I would do this. And then at the end of the study, he was compensated. He was given a gift card for his participation in the study. And so it sort of made me laugh, because the bulk of the work, he had certainly tried out this mechanical arm, but all of the setup and takedown, all of the cleaning, all of the shipping, all of the diary entries were me. And I kind of had to laugh, because nobody had ever considered that there would be another body in that house that was responsible for doing that. And the same thing happens with my son, James, with his infusions. I was trained by a nurse 3 times, and then I was asked to administer infusions on my own. And so just sort of that non-training, non-support, you're on your own because you are the care partner, is a little bit interesting. There's also, they're doing a better job of it now, but making sure that you're asking and interviewing caregivers about impact of the study on a patient, as well as the patient's experiences, because the two may differ. And it's important to understand the perspective. Does it lessen caregiver burden to be on this therapeutic or to have this device? In my case, having this device actually created an additional burden for me, because I had to maintain this thing and assemble it and put it on whenever he wanted to use it, when I could have just provided, the help. Now, does he have a better independence? Absolutely. But just anticipating the burden that could actually be on the patient is really important.
I mean, from my perspective, pharma can't do enough, because at this point, they're not doing anything, as far as I can see. And whether that's ignorance or arrogance, I go back and forth. Sometimes I just feel like, oh yeah, they just don't realize. And so that's why they're not engaging the care partners. And then there are some days where I realize, these are smart people, right? They realize that most patients have somebody as a partner helping out in some fashion. So, and the fact that they're not engaging them. I mean, just from a practical information gathering standpoint, who is closest to the individuals who are receiving treatments? Well, it's the person they're probably living with, or part of the family, or a loved one who's helping out in that regard. And why wouldn't you want to? I mean, if medical science is all about data gathering, why wouldn't you want to gather data from someone who is, even if you're going into a clinical trial where you're seeing a patient for maybe a number of hours each week, or in my case where it's a quarterly checkup. Look at all that time where you're not engaged with a medical professional, and who's experiencing that time. Well, it's the care partner. Why wouldn't you, even just informally? What's going on? How are they reacting? Or any type of questions that may elicit some kind of fact that they could use towards the development of their therapeutics, or a different program that could ultimately benefit a patient. Why wouldn't they? And yet they don't. I would like to see that. I would like to see our industry become more caregiver centric, and start engaging people. Maybe at the start it's informally, but I think the formal engagement is probably in the future. Just start thinking about us, and if we are making sacrifices, and you understand that, well, why not? I mean, why not compensate some of that?
Well, while talking about the data collected, I'm remiss if I don't mention, sort of the ultimate approval of Max and Austin's therapeutic, right? So during the clinical trial that I mentioned previously, I was noticing a huge benefit in Max's stamina and ability. He went from using a wheelchair a lot of the time to walking independently and not fatiguing. And he continued walking through his 17th year. But the study was not collecting data on stamina, and the questions that they were asking parents to fill out were about feelings. They were sort of about how is your child feeling throughout the day, but they didn't capture any of the data I was seeing. He was able to open milk cartons. Nobody could tell. Nobody was asking about those questions. And so ultimately what we turned that into is a patient-reported outcomes data collection, which was done by myself and another mom in the study. And then we presented it to the FDA. And I won't say that it was approved on the totality of the patient collected data, but I will say that we supplemented anecdotally with real life experiences.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, even an informal engagement is going to elicit, I would imagine, some real nuggets, particularly, as I said before, in those instances where you are involved with a progressive disease that worsens over time. And to see that and understand that trajectory from my perspective, I think would be invaluable for research.
Imagine if they, if more companies decided to work with caregivers on outcomes measurements before starting a clinical trial, and really eliciting, informal or formal collection of what's important to you, what's meaningful. And we do a lot of that, in my professional life. The companies I work for do that, but I don't think it's standard yet. I don't think that people are really talking to caregivers and finding out what a meaningful outcome looks like. And you're guaranteeing success in both ways by working with those patients and caregivers before you have this sort of failed study because you weren't looking at the right things. So it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, even in a situation like Parkinson's, where there are multiple medications taken on a daily basis, and I know each time we go for a neurologist meeting, there is another therapeutic presented, sometimes in place of, or sometimes in addition to, and yet nobody ever asked me what it's like for this patient, my wife, to juggle all of these medications on a daily basis. She has the typical pill box Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, and all laid out. And yet, to me, that would be a fundamental question, whether or not I'm introducing something new, and what that may mean to this individual who maybe is struggling adhering to this regimen because there's just far too many. And there's far too many times during the day where they have to be in adherence. And so, you know, that could certainly could be information gathered from the patient, but more than likely, because I'm the one who coordinates all that, it should be a question that they direct towards me. I mean, I certainly make that information available, even though it's not asked of me, just because I feel it's important.